This takes us into the second part of the day that will focus on marketplace solutions that enable better matching between labor supply and the demand of employers. So, the first talk will be by Dr. Suhani Jalota, sharing her research insight on the latent productive female labor supply in Mumbai.
Hi, everyone. So Tanvi actually showed the solution that I'll be discussing the research around. And as part of this project, this is joint work with Lisa Ho, who's also here with us today and will also be presenting her another piece of research. We're talking about solutions that are designed for women. So essentially what works for her, how work from home, digital jobs affect female labor force participation, and we're providing evidence from field experiments that we've run in Mumbai's urban slum communities. So we know this fact already. We've been discussing this a lot, that women are generally quite out of the workforce, and particularly seems to be a problem in low-middle income countries, particularly in South Asia. But it's also that these women don't seem to be leaving their homes. In fact, we find from the Time Use survey that about 70% of unemployed women are not leaving their homes even once a day in urban India. So then why do we think that the women are not able to enter the workforce? There may be various constraints that may often have to do with the traditional barriers to working outside the home. And this involves safety concerns, childcare concerns, could involve multitasking related responsibilities that they may not be able to manage along with paid work. It may be the lack of information about jobs themselves and the trust in those jobs. There may just be norms of seclusion or parda norms, which are essentially veiled norms that a woman should not be seen by the outside world. There's also disapproval from husbands and other community members that could be preventing them from working. So with all of these barriers, there also seems to be a lot of jobs available that women are just not able to do. That sorts of shows that there are maybe these large mismatches between the types of jobs available and the types of jobs that women can do given all of these constraints that they live under. And this is particularly true in the context of India, but also South Asia, the Middle East, and other such parts of the world where norms are pretty stringent. So then what can we do about it? Well, one strategy is to potentially change the norms themselves. And that, as we know, takes time. It should happen, but it takes a very long time, maybe generations. So another strategy could be to actually try to change the jobs themselves and the design of the work such that it becomes more compatible with the types of opportunities that women can actually do. And so with this, if we go back to the same list of constraints, we can provide women with jobs to overcome the safety concerns that are right next to their homes, that are women only, so only other female co-workers. We can overcome the multitasking-related barriers by providing women with work that is extremely flexible at a time of their choice. They can work when they want for however long they want. We can provide women with job information, trusted in a source that they really understand, right at home. We can also overcome these seclusion-related norms by providing women with opportunities also directly at home with devices or means that they already understand. And so in order to be able to understand whether we can actually get, and what is that latent labor supply, can we actually get women who are currently out of the workforce to enter if we actually addressed all of these barriers? We then established these sorts of jobs that provided women with reducing all of these constraints and provided women with these jobs directly from home and from these women-only, female-friendly, child-friendly centers that were right next to their homes. So it is kind of like, if you can imagine, an ideal job setup for a woman who's out of the workforce and may be constrained by a lot of these different barriers. So now what do we exactly do? Well, actually, a third strategy is that we could actually also be changing the wages. So what if you could just pay women to enter the workforce? Can you pay them high enough so that none of these barriers actually matter as much? They can overcome this by just getting paid more. We tried a lot of these, and so we actually run these experiments to mainly answer these fundamental questions. First, to what extent can work-from-home jobs actually get women to enter? And how does that differ within these local job offices that we set up versus from home? How does that differ by providing women with higher wages? So can you just pay them more? And also, is this the same for husbands? Are the husbands' determinants to this labor supply for this type of work the same as it is for the wives, or different? And then we also want to understand the mechanisms. So, well, why is it that we do see differences between work from home and office? And we explore some of these different barriers as well. And then we want to understand scaling up. Do these solutions actually have potential to scale up, given that firms may actually obviously care about cost effectiveness, productivity? Is this sort of work that women are doing from home, remotely, from these local offices, actually productive enough for them to be able to provide more of these sorts of jobs? So to do this, we run a field experiment here that I'll describe very briefly because we don't have much time, with 3,200 married households. And the job intervention is digital work, as Tanvi explained, so I won't get into the details of this. This is data labeling work on the Rani Work smartphone platform that we developed, where women can now get paid piece rate for every task that they're completing. So what did we do? We actually randomly assigned households into 7 different treatment arms, 6 treatment and 1 control, where women are being paid a low, medium, a high wage, and being assigned to either home or office at each of those wages. And these high wages are higher than their husband's wage, right? So this is a pretty significant amount of money for flexible work that women can do from or next to their home. We also randomize whether or not their husbands know directly from us about the job and about the survey. And then we run another experiment at Nline. We have an Nline survey as well. I only have time to go over a few of the results. So let me show you first. This is how work from home jobs look like. Women are on their own smartphones. Work from office jobs, where women are bringing in their smartphones to the office. They're sitting together with other women and working in these sorts of setups, again, right next to their homes. They can bring their children along as well. So what do we find? Well, the main result, now this is at baseline, all of the women that we're working with are out of the workforce. When we provide them with job opportunities over their smartphones, we see that about 56% of the women who are currently out are actually able to enter. Now, what happens when we provide the same job to women right outside their home? This is, again, within a 5-minute walking distance, where you can bring your children. Here we see that the take-up is about less than half, at about 27%. Now, that itself is quite significant, which means that we're still able to get a quarter of women that are currently out of the workforce to enter, even just by reducing a lot of these outside barriers to work and by placing these jobs right next to their homes. But we can really double that if the job is just provided at home, possibly because there may be certain barriers preventing her from leaving the home. Now, what happens with wages? I said that maybe wages could matter as well. We shockingly find, and this is kind of surprising for some of us and not as surprising for others who know the context probably better, is that the wages don't really seem to be changing the take-up rate for women at all. So even if you pay her $60 a month to $300 a month, her take-up of the same job from home is about the same. Now, there is a slight difference in take-up from a local office, so there's a slight increase between the low and the medium wage, but then it again plateaus. So wages matter less, but location matters a lot more for women to be able to enter the sort of workforce. And these estimates that we find for work from home are actually pretty significant, even in comparison to many other interventions that are trying to get women to enter the workforce. But then a question really arises, is this really about gender? And when we run a similar experiment with husbands, we find that husbands seem to be caring about the opposite. So the location doesn't seem to matter much for husbands, but it's really the wages that matter. So as you pay men more, they're much more likely to take up this sort of job. Now, this is not exactly a one-to-one comparison because many of the husbands are already working in another job. That's the context in which we work in. But still, it shows you the determinants of entry into the labor supply. We don't really have a lot of time to get into the mechanisms here. I just want to end with, we actually did a 2-year follow-up. And we've now found that actually the women who were assigned to working from home, oops, I don't know how to go back. Okay, who were assigned to working from home at first are now actually more likely to actually leave the home and work from outside in any other sort of job. And this is any work that exists. So this is 2 years after. So possibly this is an optimistic view that this could mean that maybe women are gradually able to enter jobs outside the home if this gradual step is provided at first. And I'll just pause here. I'm fortunate to have been mentored by many of the people in the room here with this research. And I'll hand it over to another mentor, actually, Steve Davis at the Hoover Institution, who's really made this occasion and this overall event really happen. So thanks so much, everyone, and over to Steve.
It's a real pleasure to be here, and especially to follow Suhani. She gave me way too much credit. This is her and her collaborators undertaking all I really did was look at it and say, wow, that's a great idea, go ahead. So my talk's actually going to be somewhat related to what Suhani was just talking about, as you'll see. Very different setting, very different context, different type of empirical research, but overlapping messages. And so let me start from the big picture that you already know, but I want to just put things in context. The pandemic triggered a shift to more remote work around the world, okay? And that's really happened everywhere, and the extent to which it happened differs a lot across countries depending on the occupational mix of jobs, the educational mix of the workforce, cultural factors, the exact characteristics of their pandemic. But we've seen this shift, across countries around the world. When you look within countries, there's a very pronounced relationship between educational attainment and how much work from home rates have risen since the pandemic struck. And the basic story is more highly educated people have made the bigger shifts into remote work. Now we're going to study how this shift played out in one country, Turkey, in one large firm, okay, called Tempo. It's a major customer service firm with a broad clientele of businesses and government organizations, and much of its work is call centers, and so we're going to focus on those call centers. We've got really super individual level data on productivity and customer quality that's being provided by these call center agents, and so we're going to draw on that high quality data, and we've got it over time from 2019 to 2023. So think of this as a company, and I'll tell you what happened to this company now. Basically, it went from all of its call center agents were working on site almost all of the time to all of its call center agents were working in a fully remote capacity. So the shift was instigated by the pandemic. It was a response to the lockdown restrictions in Turkey, but then they decided to stick with it afterwards. So really a major change. This company, Tempo, they've got about 3,500 employees. Before the pandemic, they operated at physical locations in 7 provinces in Turkey with headquarters in Istanbul. Afterwards, as I've already told you, they shifted to fully remote work. So this shift happened in the space of 2 weeks in March, so very abrupt shift. The company facilitated the shift by providing its call center workers with computers and internet support equipment that they could take home. Okay, so that's the setting. Now, to understand what that meant for the workers, here's the picture. So in panel A, those are 2 snapshots from offices before the pandemic. And the feature that I want you to take away from those office settings is these are high distraction environments with many people working in close physical proximity. And, it's an office and it's a crowded one. It's not, don't think of this as luxurious office quarters versus cramped quarters at home. Then on the right side, panel B, those are just 4 different employees working from home after the pandemic. So you can see there's a pretty stark shift in the working environment. And of course, you don't have to commute and so on. So I just want you to understand the context before I show you the results. So here's the summary of the main findings. Big shifts in the composition of the workforce over time towards more representation of women, both single women and married women, older workers, and people who live outside metropolitan areas. Okay, and in the Turkish context, you can think of those as groups, especially among women outside metropolitan areas who had relatively low labor force participation rates. So productivity actually rose as measured by number of customers served per hour by these agents. There was no loss of service quality. In fact, the evidence is suggestive of some slight improvements in service quality, but those effects are small and sometimes not statistically significant, so I won't really emphasize them in my remarks today. The productivity effects were quite similar for men and women. Okay, so here's perhaps the biggest headline result in the paper. And I'll show you a bunch of pictures like this that have 2 vertical red lines. The leftmost vertical red line, That's when the lockdown restrictions were imposed in Turkey. That's March 11th, 2020. And they were lifted late in 2021 in Turkey, and that's kind of a pretty hard shift in Turkey. So we'll think of this intermediate period as being the lockdown period, then there's the before pandemic period, and there's the post-lockdown period. You'll see that over and over again in these pictures. So before the pandemic struck, Tempo's customer service workforce was about 50% women. By the end of this sample period in early 2023, so this is after the lockdown has ended, it's more like 75%. So huge shift towards women, okay? So that's result number one. Now, if you break things down a little bit more finely, and I'll show you a bit of that, you can see that there was also a shift towards more married agents, so people who've got kids to manage and so on. But that was entirely accounted for by a shift to married women. There was no increase in the employment rate at this company of married men. There was also quite a sharp move away from populous provinces, metropolitan areas in Turkey. So this is a group where people might have good skills but found it hard to find a job in close proximity, and this gave them the opportunity to work from home. And then here's the basic story at the whole workforce level. Okay, so here I'm not trying to control for, actually this does have controls for individual fixed effects. We can measure the kinds of calls that these agents are servicing, so there's controls for the mix of calls over time. And this is just showing you what's happened to our basic productivity measure, customer calls serviced per hour. These are all incoming calls, typically responding to some issue or complaint or change in service by the customer. And you can see there's a pretty big increase that happens not immediately, so when they shift to remote work, but within a few weeks. There's an increase in productivity that then persists even after the lockdown restrictions are removed. Now, if you break that down, we can break this down in various ways. It's mainly coming because each agent is spending less time talking to each customer, and they're putting them on hold less often as well, okay? That's the leftmost chart and the top chart. You might worry that, well, they're working from home, maybe they're actually working harder or longer. In fact, they're getting more break time, okay? That's the other panel there. So these agents are increasing their productivity. They are taking less time per customer, a little bit less. Service quality doesn't fall, break time rises. We think what's happening is basically you're taking these people out of these high distraction, congested environments, putting them in their own home. It's less distracting, it's more comfortable for them. They're able to get more done on their job. Now, there's another aspect that's a little more subtle that's happening. We actually find that, the people who start working remotely have a steeper learning curve initially or early on. That's kind of contrary to what you might think, than those who were working at this company before the pandemic. But that kind of, but the on-site workers kind of catch up over a while. And eventually I kind of chop this curve off because there's a high attrition rate here. Eventually you see some considerable drop off in the productivity measure for the remote workers. And that may be some kind of boredom effect or so on that kicks in, but that comes later. I said the productivity patterns are quite similar for men and women. Here they are. There is kind of one, it's not a big difference, but it's one material difference between men and women that I thought you might appreciate seeing, which is men take longer breaks on average. And it's not a huge effect. It amounts to about 10 more minutes of break time per day. And that is offset by the fact that men are slightly less chatty on the phone with the customers. And so these two effects kind of even out in terms of the overall productivity measure. Now, I've painted a pretty positive picture here, okay? You know, we've got these more representation of employment from these groups that typically had more challenges in obtaining employment in the Turkish context. There's not only no productivity loss, there's significant productivity gains, there's no drop-off in customer service quality, and there's actually an increase in break time. So that's all great. It just sounds wonderful. There is one challenge that I haven't emphasized. It's discussed in the paper. I just want to tee it up here because it is an issue. This is a company that faces high attrition rates. And you can imagine if you're on the phone 8 hours a day talking to people, solving their problems over and over again. So this company typically has attrition rates somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% a year. And that's costly for the company because they've got to train these new employees so that they can service their customers appropriately. The people who work remotely have even higher attrition rates than the company was experiencing before the pandemic. So the company really wants to figure out how can we stay in this remote work mode but reduce the attrition rates. And we are currently fielding an experiment with the cooperation of the company to address that issue. By the way, one of my co-authors on this project is quietly sitting over there, Nick Bloom, both the paper I just talked about and the field experiment. And what we're doing in the field experiment, and I'll end here, is let's bring employees, a randomly selected set of employees, or teams of employees, into the office 1 day a month. Let's have them work, half day or 3/4 of the day, but let's go heavy on the socializing activities, the mentoring activities, getting to know your boss. And what we want to see is, will that establish a closer connection between the employees and the company so that attrition rates go down over time while the company continues to get the benefits of this shift to remote work? Thanks very much.
This panel will focus on flexible work arrangements, which would include online, offline, part-time, and gig work. So I'd love to call on our panelists. This panel will be moderated by Pragya Khanna, Global Head of Sustainability and Vice President of Process Group and Naspers Limited. And the panelists will be Mrs. Namrata Adani, Director of Adani Group, Professor Achutva Advaryu, Tata Endowment Professor of Economics, UC San Diego, and co-founder of the Good Business Lab, Nick Bloom, Professor of Economics here at Stanford, and Hannah Rickson, Director of Sustainability and Impact at Upwork. Please give a round for our panelists.
Round for you. Thank you so much for having us here. And I hope everybody's, you've done mic tests, they seem to work. Does everybody just want to say hello and a quick introduction? Then we know if the mics work.
It's working.
Brilliant.
Hi, I'm Ach Advaryu. Nice to be here.
Hi, everyone. Hannah from Upwork.
And Nick Bloom from Stanford.
Hi, I'm Namrata, all the way from India.
Wonderful. Thank you for making the journey. Lovely to be here. So I have the absolute pleasure of hosting a very diverse set of panelists who hopefully will bring very diverse perspectives on what is gig work. So why is gig work important, or why do I have an interest in it, is because our company has invested in multiple digital platforms. We primarily invest in digital platforms across the world that have, across our portfolio of companies, we have about 20 million gig workers in there. So it's very, very interesting to us, but this is offline gig work. And what's really interesting in the work that Suhani and the team has been doing, but first of all, what a cool academician with an entrepreneur in residence inside her. So well done for all the work that you've done today. And there is clear nuances between, our perception of what gig work is, which is a lot of it is framed by the external dialogue around us and ride-hailing apps, where there was a lot of societal or regulatory talk about. And I'd love for you to start, Hannah, and tell us a little bit about online gig work and what the nuances between being a gig worker or entrepreneur. How do you view the worker?
Thank you. Great question. So I saw Upwork has been mentioned a few times. How many people in the room, just show of hands, are familiar with what Upwork does? Okay, wow. So I don't have to do very much explaining. I'll just give kind of the basic overview. Upwork, of course, is a global work marketplace. That means that we have talent and clients in over 180 countries globally. Since we started tracking, I think in 2006, freelancers on Upwork have made over $25 billion collectively. And so any work that can be done remotely, any sort of knowledge work that can be done digitally can be done on Upwork. Our largest work categories are things like web, mobile, software development, marketing, and creative work. But we also have admin, legal, you name it. If it can be done remotely, it can be done on Upwork. I will say, I joined 4 years ago, and even at the time, I had some misunderstandings of what Upwork really was. And so one of the sort of challenges is to make sure people really understand how to use Upwork effectively. And a lot of people think of Upwork as sort of an online temp agency. We don't think of it that way. People certainly can figure out how to use it that way and find ways to be successful. But, I think there's a really important difference between sort of thinking about it as a place to get a temporary gig, maybe entry level, just a short term, multifaceted, you'll be doing different tasks, no clear deliverable, you just want sort of your first work opportunity, and maybe that'll turn into a full-time job. There's a big difference between coming with that mindset and then coming with the mindset of, I am an entrepreneur with specific skills I can offer and a specific deliverable in mind that I can offer this client. And I think it matters both in terms of how clients use us effectively and also how talent uses us effectively.
Absolutely, and I think what's really important to also highlight is the fact, especially with our portfolio, we're everywhere, both in the global south and the global north. There is the local economic context, societal norms, and general women participation in the labor force will impact. We were talking about this just before. Tell us a little bit about the work that you've done, and we were thinking about how can we leverage the enabling factors that enable women to join formal employment to also then make that transition to using the same factors to encourage more women to participate in the gig economy.
Yeah, that's right. So wonderful to be here, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this event. My work largely focuses actually on how to recruit better and design jobs better in the formal sector for women in low-income countries, and a lot of work in India to this regard. But the work I want to talk about today focuses kind of like on the in-between space between sort of like own account work or self-employment work in rural areas and kind of that formal sector. So the idea is that often this sort of own account and micro entrepreneurship businesses that have been very successfully fostered for some time now by movements like the microfinance revolution have actually to a certain extent succeeded in getting some more women to do this kind of work and take part in that opportunity. But often those are sort of like short term or very small income generating opportunities. So is there a way to integrate women better into supply chains, particularly global supply chains, that might actually generate sort of long-lasting and perhaps larger, income jumps and create those kind of more lucrative opportunities even for rural women? So this project that we are in the middle of right now, that I'll just take a moment to explain, focuses on the fashion supply chain and essentially having rural women participate by creating little crocheted squares that then go into larger products like handbags or sweaters and things like that that use some of that work. And so what we did was, very similarly to what Suhani mentioned in her study as well, we focused on this kind of distinction between working inside and outside the home, and looking at the idea that working within the home for many rural women, particularly women who are not in the labor force, might be an easy entry path into income generating opportunities, and also might create kind of lasting change compared to working outside the home. So we actually ran an experiment in rural Rajasthan in India, where we offered women the opportunity to take up this work either from their homes or from a village factory setup, essentially a little space in their villages, which was very, very close to their homes. It was, basically right outside their doors. And very similarly to what Suhani found and Lisa find in their work, the take-up differences are massive with respect to women really wanting to work within their homes on these products. And not only is take-up more, the effort that women put in is greater, so they actually work about 88% more hours when they're working within the home. They make approximately 100% or double the product when they're working within their home. And similarly to what Steve just mentioned, productivity actually goes up substantially as a result of working within the home. And a big part of this is, we think, learning by doing. So, when you make these products, you start out kind of slow and then you speed up and you're much better at making quality products. And that occurs more within the home because women are just able to devote a little bit more time to it. Part of this comes from multitasking as well, which, as we know from the pandemic, we all probably experienced this. That's a double-edged sword of, distracting and potentially productivity killing, but also when you're able to multitask effectively, as women tend to do, in these settings, you actually find that productivity on net goes up. So this is kind of one step toward understanding ways in which kind of global supply chains might be able to reach all the way into people's homes. And as Suhani mentioned, rather than tackling a deep-seated norm, and we can debate about how deep-seated these norms really are and all that, maybe one immediate solution is changing the way that the amenities and the features that jobs provide. And one of those being working from home, and the flexibility seems to be really, really valuable across all these different settings.
And I think a very critical takeaway and extra layering on that is the fact that I think 90% of supply chains, global supply chains, end in the global south.
Yes.
So that opportunity is huge. And if we would overlay an Upwork sort of an idea onto this, and imagine if we had, a company agnostic platform, digital platform, where these women could log on with whatever sort of expertise that they can bring. It doesn't matter if then it's for H&M or for Zara or for whoever, whichever other, So I think technology has a very easy, quick opportunity there to go from which could be online enabled gig work for the same women. So next step. And of course, if we're talking working from home, we have to come to you, Nick. And you've done a lot of research, or your research has focused on, from at the time of at COVID, the remote work and the productivity. And was there a woman angle to it? Did you look at a gender perspective as well within the research?
Yeah, you're right. I think if I'm going to speak as a safe bet, I'm going to talk about work from home. So yes, I mean, the theme we've come up, you saw Suhani, we talked with Lisa from Atch's stuff, Steve Davis talked, we have there's multiple papers. What you see very consistently is work from home actually increases employment in general across both genders. So it's, you see men will take these jobs as well. Interestingly, one group that's very favorable on it, we haven't talked about, is folks with a disability. For them, getting to work is an enormous challenge, and also controlling your work. You can imagine if you have serious back issues, it's not just getting in, but if you're sat in a chair. But another group you see very strong evidence for is women. So in study after study, you see it just increases female employment. And I love the setting that Suhani and Atch picked up on it as well, that it's like, ideally you change the norm, but norms take a long time to change. And actually, it's funny, Atch and I were talking about Suhani and Lisa's long-run follow-up about, it's not just that they do these work-from-home jobs, but they're more likely to have in-office jobs in the longer run. So, it's like a stepping stone, and 5-10 years more, these women are working more generally. I think my thought for everyone here is, how do you change this? And I'll give you kind of two thoughts on this. I talked to an enormous number of firms, execs, journalists, etc. The biggest pitch I've had, there are two groups you need to persuade. One is firms, and honestly, for firms, it's to persuade them, which I think is correct, it's profitable. So if you're going to tell a CEO, you should support hybrid, you should support remote, you want to persuade them it is profitable for your company, because ultimately they'll do that. The data seems pretty supportive on it. You've seen 2 or 3 studies. We had one in Nature last year, a very kind of similar setup where we did an A/B test on work from home in a company called Trip.com. So they're listed on NASDAQ, they're worth about 40 billion. Their founding CEO, weirdly enough, this is very Stanford, was in my class 15 years ago. And so him and their current CEO, Jane Sons, they did this big A/B test, and they randomized whether, on even on odd birthdays, whether you got to work from home 2 days a week. And what you find is working from home had no effect on performance. So everyone says, well, like, surely you've got to come into the office for mentoring, for creativity and innovation. But once you're in the office 2-3 days a week, the value added of those extra days is very low. So the productivity scores and performance and promotions, all of this thing is flat. What you did see is quit rates fell by a third. And quits are really expensive for companies. So typically the estimates, every person that quits costs you $50,000 to $100,000. And so for Trip.com, which is a publicly listed company, this was like a no-brainer. It was increasing profits by 10, 20 million a year. So, much like Suhani, we're seeing this over and over again. Productivity typically is flat or up. Turnover is lower, and it's very profitable. The other angle, I think, is for politicians. Everyone's kind of aware of what's going on domestically. A more interesting thing is Australia. Is anyone here following Australian politics? Probably
Election.
a few. So they're having an election coming up.
Yes.
Pretty fascinatingly, in Australia, I wish I was there. Work from home has become like a big topic. So Albanese, who's the current incumbent, is pro it, and Dutton, who is the kind of main challenger, has been against it and saying everyone should come back to the office full time. Turned out it's so unpopular that Dutton's kind of rapidly reversed policy and backed out and said, actually, we changed our mind. Albanese was slightly mischievous because he implied that Dutton was saying this was for everyone. In fact, they were talking about, government workers, but even so politicians, if we all kind of express our opinions that we like work from home, we can also boost this. And directly, until we change norms, I think this is a huge driver of female, and in fact, disability and even men's labor force participation.
Well, and also just a comment that actually Lisa and Suhani's work, I think, showed that you can actually, by doing this work from home opportunities, actually contribute towards changing norms. So you change how women, view their own abilities to work, and how men in the household view their own abilities, women's ability to work and contribute to household responsibilities and all that. So it could also be part of that process. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hannah, very quick one, coming back to you with this. Nick just mentioned, there is this aspiration or a general understanding or a general expectation of that this short-term work from home, remote, digital-enabled work should lead you to a sustainable long-term job. But increasingly, there's a shift you have digital nomads, you have people who are just really intrinsically not long-term workers. There are some sectors where this has been, just the norm. I mean, TV and film production, you always get gig work. It's not, there's no expectation around it. So Hannah, give me a little bit about your view and perspective, what you've seen from the women who've been successful on your platform.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to your comments, Upwork obviously has been proselytizing remote work for a long time. In 2020, when COVID hit, it was like, you guys, see, we were right. And now there's a little bit more pushback, so we're still kind of having to make the argument. But yeah, I mean, we think of flexible work. When most people think about the term flexible work, I think they're thinking about, or hybrid work, they're thinking about remote or in office. And we see that, right? We use the term in that way as well, but we also think about employment versus freelancing, right? And so not everyone wants a long-term job with one employer. Unfortunately, the truth is that employment itself has gotten shakier, right? Very few of us have the many-year pensions that once existed, or, the people are moving from job to job more often than they used to. And so I think a lot of people have rightfully realized I can actually have more job security if I have multiple clients, or I have a clear deliverable skill I can offer, and I can bring in this client and then that client and then that client on the platform and continue to work with multiple clients. So yeah, I think, we don't want to sort of dictate what success looks like. If someone wants a long-term job, or if they want to even just work as a freelancer for a single client long-term, then great. I mean, if they can find that relationship with a client on Upwork, more power to both of them. But yeah, I think, we think of terms like tenure, right? The goal on Upwork isn't necessarily that you're going to have a long tenure with one client. You want your pay, you want your hourly rate, or the rate that you're being paid at. Maybe it's based on milestone, maybe it's based on hour. You want that to be good. You want to sort of have the flexibility to choose which clients you work with and what hours you work for them, what hours you're working for them. There's a lot of asynchronous work happening on Upwork. And in the context of women, obviously, that flexibility really helps. If you are a caretaker, either for children or elderly parents. It really helps to just be able to choose when you work. And we've surveyed our customers, freelancers on the platform, to say, hey, do you feel empowered to choose when you work, or are actually clients kind of dictating? And overwhelming majority, 75%, yes, I can choose when I want to work. The client's not dictating that. I do the work when I need to do it, and I deliver the final product when we agreed to.
Wonderful. Mrs. Adani, you are building the workforce of the future in all your educational institutions that you run.
Yes.
Is this a consideration of, there has been a massive shift from the idea of employment. You would have, traditionally you would have lifers. People would go into an organization and then come out 40 years later with a pension. And then there has been this whole remote work opportunity. People want more challenges, they want more diversity in their career paths. In your student population, do you see a shift in their desires, or is that completely, or is it still the ideal employment is 40-year job in one company?
Thank you for that question. It is very difficult, because in corporate, a lot of people say that it is very easy to do things, but, we do follow a lot of government regulations also. So we do have a lot of challenges in that perspective because, not everybody wants to work, or the teachers, or we recruit them, they don't want to work in those fields because, we are very particular because we have to give them the laptops and the data and everything. So if they work from home, are all safety goes away if they work from home. So on that context, I think it is very difficult for them to work from home.
So how do you then think about the edtech platforms that exist, that have become everything from Brainly to Udemy to all in India, there's a lot, there's, enabling people to learn when they want, how they want, and teachers or trainers to take these as gig jobs?
No, they are doing, because we have two kinds of model. One is the rural development model, where we give them that platform that you work from home. We are giving this equipment. It's called Sakhi program, which is called a buddy program, wherein buddy, she does the mentorship in the rural village, and she mentors the whole ecosystem there in the village. Yeah.
And what was the second model? So one is the Sakhi program?
Sakhi, and one is the, it's an IB program, so it's a high-end school program. So where you don't have to tell them to work from home. You need the physical appearance and everything because, they work with the laptops and everything. So we don't want our data to going out.
Right. Yeah. But I know my son is sat here and he follows an IB program as well. A lot of the young people are now using online tutors, ChatGPT.
Yes. It's a huge challenge. That's why I've written that, because in that also, we need a certification program because, without that, we don't encourage that, you start using all those bot systems.
Right.
It is very challenging, I feel.
And do you have a policy on it? What do you see as the future?
Yeah, of course, every organization has a policy, but, we see as a future that, we have to live with this because if you don't give, but we have to have somewhere the balance around.
Right. I'm just curious, Nick, you're a teacher here. What is the policy here at Stanford?
Well, I was happy, Namrata, I had to take the question first. I was actually intrigued as to what you were going to say. There is no one policy. I mean, exactly. I think most people have exactly your view, which is this is life. And so you should be allowed to use ChatGPT. One thing that's changed is you probably are moving away from just setting students writing short essays. Yeah. And also there are certain things that it's pretty clear they're going to look up. Like, in fact, it's more in high school. My kids have said in high school for French translation, people are just using Google and ChatGPT. But I totally agree that, 5-10 years, this is the workforce. So it seems crazy to say let's ignore it. You're better off just letting them use it, accepting it's there.
I don't know, after 10 years, that's what Bill Gates was there in India recently. And he said, the teacher's job and the doctor's jobs are going to be at the risk, So the more and more schools and institutions we are planning to open, we are really vouching the research, what after 10 years it's going to be.
Yeah, looking at the crystal ball, because also from healthcare, right? The technology and AI-based technology solutions are really revolutionizing how you're, especially really remote based access to healthcare. That's some research that you've also done. What do you see as the role for women who, in the healthcare sector around the world, other than top management, it is women who make up the body of healthcare providers. Is there a platform-enabled remote work possibility you see in that crystal ball of yours?
Yeah, it's crystal ball gazing at this point, so I can't report any results. But I do see that there's certainly a lot of potential for women to come into that industry because there's traditionally more of an acceptance for women to play those roles all over the world, in India in particular. And I think that, as to the ChatGPT, rise in all occupations, I think, the best we can do, as organizational leaders, as teachers and sort of leaders in our community is basically understand its role and how it's changing things, but also, promote how best to use it to be more productive within our organizations, to be better students, et cetera. So I think that, the sort of one side of the response being we're afraid of AI, we want to shut it down, and then we just make people do what we've always done is sort of not going to work. And, I think, what we need is an approach that embraces that technology and, understands how we need to adapt to the technology and how we teach and how we lead organizations, et cetera. And there, I think women, also might have a very critical role to play if we structure policy and incentives correctly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, AI, it's the AI industrial revolution that we're witnessing, and either you're with it or you're not. And I do think that there is going to be the haves and have-nots of AI benefits. The digital divide is just going to get much bigger. Some of the research we saw today was really focused on very, very rural, traditional sort of contexts, and they are certainly not going to be benefiting from this unless intentional policies and work get put in place. To situations such as yours, for example, where you were talking about the women who are engaged, gainfully employed in the global south. Tell me.
I was telling, we have a very good policy in our system. It's called masking policy. So my HR, it is like a gender, they do not know which gender it is coming from. So we have 3 CFOs, women working in our airport businesses, 2 CFO working as HR businesses. So it is a very good, we have just started 1 year back, and it works very well as an AI tool where, as we are talking about gender equality and pay parity, so that is also quite equal.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear your views on maybe Hannah, yourself as a follow-up on the use of AI in the end-to-end life cycle of either an employee or livelihood opportunity, which is from recruitment to termination and lowering cost of acquisition. Do you have an experience as well on?
Well, yeah, what I can say is AI is the equal opportunity disruptor, right? When it's for so long been the manual labor that's been impacted by automation, and now you see knowledge work being impacted by AI. And so, of course, Upwork saw this very, quickly. Our stated goal is to really make the talent Upwork the most AI-enabled talent you can find. And we have been banging that drum for the last, year and a half of, if you want to work on Upwork, our recommendation is to get acquainted with XYZ tools. Use them in your work. It will make your work faster, but it'll also make you so much more marketable on the site. As probably is, not surprising to anyone, the AI job category, so that can be anything from prompt engineering to, actually building these tools themselves and doing the data analytics, that's our fastest growing work category. Things like, writing and translation, that's going to change. It's just the job categories that are more in demand, and also how talent are doing those jobs is rapidly changing. So, it's one of those things where I think we're all sort of waiting to see exactly where it goes, but we're trying not to be, too responsive and more sort of proactive.
Yeah. I think organizations that wait to respond are going to be the ones that get left behind. You have to keep trying and testing and moving ahead on that. Nick, another one for you on, in your work, did you see Did you see there was a gender, I don't know if you researched this aspect specifically on, was the balance between doing household work and being able to be productively doing your job remotely, was there a difference between the men and women?
I'll give you an anecdote, then mention the average stage. So I heard anecdotally going in both directions from women. So, anecdotally, some women would say, look, it's great being able to work from, if they were primary carers, because, it's easier, and if I have a nanny, say, or, an au pair or something, I can watch them, or if not, I can pick my kids up from school. There are other people that said it's terrible because I can't escape, and I want a bit of time. And I would say those anecdotes, they were in the kind of dozens on both sides, they netted out. I'd tell you the two data points we see, which is in the stuff with Steve and Jose and Shelby and others, if you look at preferences, what you see is the big driver is actually having kids. So if you look at men and women, if they have children under the age of 12, their preference to work from home goes up a lot. It increases, this is slightly more for women, but if I was to ask you one data point to know whether you like work from home, is do you have children under the age of 12? And it's kind of actually relatively gender neutral. The other thing that's interesting is in the American time use survey, you can look at what happens to time use of folks that work from home. And you do see in levels that women do more housework and there's a number of home chores. But if you look at of people that work from home, the delta, the increase for men is actually somewhat larger. So, they're still behind, but proportionately, at least that gap is closer. So the ATUS knows, you see particularly college-educated men. So in the US, this is college-educated men spend a lot more time with kids if they're working from home. So I don't have data in other countries, but the thing that I saw is kids, and the biggest group is honestly come back to a disability. So I think work from home is positive for everyone. I keep trying to push this. Talking to the current administration, the most frustrating thing is I know they're against it. I'm like, why would you be against it? Because the more people that are working from home, the more people are working and they're paying taxes. As if we've got a massive deficit, and if you want people to pay taxes, and if you want to control inflation, you want more people working to push down, prices. So it's totally a win-win. I don't really understand why anyone would be against it. If you commute to work, the person in front of you works from home, they're not driving, you can go a little bit faster. There's very few downsides to this, but there's people that just get angry and somehow are against.
But tell me, how do you do the measurable goals? Because I feel like corporate like us, it's very challenging for them to give them the insurance, the taxes, the other benefits, because that employer wants everything. So how do we measure that?
By the way, great point. I don't mean only about half of jobs can do it at all. So if you look in the US, which is kind of the most advanced, something like 50% of jobs you can't at all. So if you're like cleaning, the people that's going to serve the food. And then of the other 50%, roughly only 10% are fully remote. So most people, hybrid, this will be so much better in person than it. So most jobs now, a typical thing for my Stanford undergrads is you're going to be in the office 3 days, you'll work from home 2. There's about 10%, which are kind of elite coders, call centers, data entry, crochet makers. I'm not sure we have a category for them. They can be fully remote.
But the point that you raise is really, really interesting because from our businesses, we have, for example, everything. We have a stake here in DoorDash. We have a very big stake in Swiggy in India. We Delivery Hero, which is 34 brands globally. One of the most worker welfare and benefits.
Labor policy.
How do you structure that? So currently, at least in India, you see, and we've been mapping regulation globally on this, on gig work or on-demand platform-enabled work. You see that there is, Europe sort of defines it, and then the rest of the world sort of follows, which is actually unfortunate, because also with the Indian government, how do you create? This is a third paradigm of work. It's not traditional employment. You cannot put regulations that suited traditional employment structures. Carte blanche on this new type of employment. And there is, how do you do insurance for a delivery driver who is multi-apping? They have the flexibility and autonomy to be able to deliver at the same time for 3 different, in the morning be a courier, in the afternoon do a lunchtime delivery, then be a courier, and then do dinner deliveries. So how do you structure insurance products for them? Or the benefits and also pensions. So I know Southeast Asia,
because pensions is very important in India because, the woman who's doing a work at home, and if she doesn't get any benefit or she doesn't understand.
Yeah. So I know that the Indian government, for example, has just, it's not yet been implemented in a couple of states. Yes. I still think that the devil is in the detail of the implementation, because theoretically the idea is that you would have a pool that is run by the government, and then there's all gig employers or gig livelihood enablers would contribute to the pool, but the devil is in the detail. How does it work at Upwork for you? Where does the worker benefits come in?
Well, so for our customers, for the freelancers on Upwork, it's wildly different depending on where you're working, right? It's a global platform. So if you are based in the US, you are giving up your health benefits and other things by not working for a full-time employer. Me personally, this is my personal view, right? I think that that's an unfortunate limitation, that your health benefits and the coverage for your family is then tied to the specific employer that you have. Now, if you are based in Spain and you're working on Upwork, you have a different scenario because you tap into the local social safety net regardless. So it's a challenge. It's just a challenge, especially for a global platform where everyone's working on slightly different terms and with different, legal requirements. I will say too, for the clients, they're shifting, but the varied legal requirements for what constitutes an employment job and what constitutes a freelance job differs. It differs across states. If you're in California or New Jersey, you need to be very clear with the types of work that you are giving this worker, right? If there's any training involved, if there's certain things that automatically make it so that it really needs to be an employment role. It should not be a contractor role. And so a lot of Upwork services are for clients that are trying to correctly classify the people that they hire, because there's a lot of legal ramifications if you get it wrong. So it's tricky. It would be much easier, certainly, if there was more consistency across borders. It's one of the things, in addition to, I think, benefiting women, one of the other groups, including disabled people living with disabilities, is immigrants and refugees, right? Upwork should be a great platform for you if you need to cross borders and you have skills that you can take with you, keep working. And it's been sort of a humbling experience for me trying to launch a few programs to help refugees and asylum seekers who are looking to find work. Well, you can do the work on Upwork, but you have the legal right to work in the location where you are and a legal right to open a bank account. Like, those things are still limitations that we can't control, but that certainly limit people's ability to use us effectively. Of course.
Just to comment, I think there's likely some under exploitation of the ability for some of these benefits to be recruitment incentives for platforms, especially related to gig work. I think one model is, of course, to pay into a pool, and that's really hard to get right.
That's been done very well in Singapore and Malaysia.
Okay. So
they've done a really good job
but here in the U.S., I think the Black Car Fund and other things have tried to start this up, but it's been really difficult to sort of mobilize, get agreement from all the platforms. Who should pay in? Who classifies as a platform worker? Do you need to work on just one of these platforms for how many hours a week? To get certain benefits. But if we think back to I think personally also unfortunate role of employers in health insurance here in the U.S. Like, that was originally used as it came about historically as a recruitment tool for businesses, and I think that you might be able to use the same leverage the same kind of incentive that if one platform offers certain benefits, they're going to have workers that are more likely to stick with that platform and work more intensively there, et cetera. And so, I think there's probably some under experimentation and maybe things that platforms can try around the world that show success stories in that regard.
So, question for all of you, quick one on, do you then think that regulation, this whole classification and making it really complex for this third dimension of livelihoods and income opportunities, do you think regulation is stifling the sector very, very early? I've seen that with in the EU, for example, it's stifles a lot of innovation and growth, and the tech industry, for example, especially on AI. We have the EU AI directive. Nobody knows AI yet, and then you have directive that comes in ahead of the industry getting to its maturity. Do you think that's something that's happening and globally? I don't know how much perspective you have on Southeast Asia, but in the US?
I mean, short answer, yes. I think it's a problem. I think it's hampering innovation. I think it's hampering workers' ability to choose what is best for them in that moment, right? Remote work is great when you have kids, and I've benefited from that. And maybe in a couple years, that'll change for me, right? Like, we all have shifting lives and shifting needs, and if there's only one employment model in each geography or, state, it's a problem.
Right. In India, what do you think? So if we would not look at regulation as it exists, so if you could tell the regulators what the regulation should be to enable innovation, social innovation, economic innovation, what would that be based on your experience?
I think, in our company like us, we are doing a lot of not the people are sticking to one work, because if we have a business like cement business, or we are into airport businesses, so employee has that chance to change that business, so we keep on transferring them, from one organization to other organization. So that freedom of space is there.
Right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Any questions from the audience? We have 1 minute, 33 seconds. Otherwise, I have one. Oh, you have
I
one.
think there's someone back there.
Yes. 1 minute, 20, 19.
Wow, lots of pressure. Thank you so much to the panel for sharing your valuable insights. My question was, and we've obviously had a lot of conversation throughout this day around changing norms and shifting cultural norms, etc. I wanted to ask if there were any findings around shifts in the distribution of intra-household care work. Especially in the low and middle income country setting.
Shall I do? No, you take it.
No, I mean, if I'm representing Lisa and Suhani's work correctly, I think that there was some increase in men in the household working on household responsibilities as a result of the take-up of this sort of work from home for women. So there was some understanding of the value, of the economic value of economic opportunities for women in these households, and that men supported, put their work behind that kind of belief change and actually contributed in some way to the household. I'm not sure if I'm representing that accurately, so I'll leave it to them to clarify. We're measuring the same kind of effects in our experiment in rural Rajasthan. So I think, perhaps the sort of the idea that norms are really, really deep-seated and are really hard to change is not well-founded, or that, there's, I think, ways in which certain interventions might change norms pretty quickly. I think Rohini's work also has found similar things on giving women, access to their own accounts for their work with NREGA. So I think, there are changes going on. It remains highly unequal as far as I know in terms of the division of labor in many countries within the household, but I think you shift closer to equality.
So
in my education sector, I see a huge change between the parents' communication, because I see a lot of men's coming to the parents-teacher meeting, and they have been very active part of the whole system. And women are giving more and more, especially it's happening in second generation. So the first generation is still getting there, but second generation, I feel, is really being very active in taking the role.
Wonderful. And that's insights from the ground. And if I may just add one, and then a quick question. So, when we generalize about a country the size of India, 1.4 billion people, which India are we talking about? Because, the India that I know is where the household labor is not men or women, it's the help that comes. So, I think that it's important to qualify which strata we're talking about in the middle income country, and not make generalizations across the entire 1.4 billion people.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dhaval Shah. I'm a Stanford alumni. Thank you very much for this wonderful panel. I had a question to follow up on, at the risk of getting stares from my fellow men. I have a follow-up to your thought about multitasking, women being better than men in multitasking. So especially when it's working from home, when men are working from home versus women, what are some of the observations? Because probably when they're at work, maybe there's no need to multitask too much. But at home,
May I
how
give
are
a
the
quick
data?
answer first?
Thank
I'll
you.
just kick this off. So, as a woman, I am terrible at multitasking. Maybe that has made me a better professional, and I can deliver better results and have been able to go up the corporate ladder. So I don't know if there's any research out there that actually, ratifies the fact that men or women. Does anybody know of any research on men and women being multitaskers, or is it just a perception?
It's always women.
I'm not quite sure. I certainly can't multitask. Ask me to write.
I don't know if your research speaks to that. I know, like in our study, this was with all women, so I can't speak to the comparison, but a sizable portion of the hours that women are able to spend at home working comes from multitasking. Which they're less able to do in these kind of in the village setting outside the home. We actually made it like pretty flexible. They can still bring their kids, they can bring other tasks with them, but just inherently being in the physical setting of your space in your home makes it easier to multitask. So we do find that I think between a quarter to a third of the increase in hours that they're actually spending on this economic opportunity is done while multitasking.
But you haven't run a same control group with men?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair. Sorry. Nick, you were going to say
No,
something.
I'm very happy that Pragya and Namrata, you're taking all the hard questions. Now, we in the stuff that I've seen, you don't see any difference in the productivity effect of men versus women of work from home. To be clear, come back to Namrata's point earlier, for some things like call centers and crochet making, it's very positive. For other things, it can be quite negative. So like teaching. Teaching is terrible on Zoom. I don't know how many people here would either taught or were teaching on Zoom. It's just awful. I remember in the beginning of the lockdown, I had this experience. I had a class of like 50 people. I had to flip them onto Zoom. And there's one kid that didn't realize that he turned off all the lights in the room. So the only light on his face was from his laptop. And he was wearing big glasses. So it's reflecting. And I'd be like showing slides. There was nothing was changing. And his glasses were changing. And I knew, at one point, I was like, I think he's watching The Sopranos. But like teaching is terrible. Call centers are great. It really very much depends on the task. But everything I've seen when you've interacted, productivity effect of work from home, whether it's positive or negative, you don't really see any gender effect, actually. Yeah, the other thing I found is I think the study's saying multitasking is not really possible. So people doing, there's probably many people checking their email right now, but it's like you're kind of 70% efficient at both, and it's hard to actually, you're better off doing one or something else.
And the power of suggestion, telling a girl all her life that you're better at multitasking, so you'll do the housework, is let's move away from that. But thank you so much. I don't know if we're out of time, Suhani? We are now really officially out of time. It's been an absolute pleasure. We could carry on forever. Do you have one sentence each to just round up?
Yeah, I think women have to take charge of themselves. And I strongly believe that financially independent you must be. And that's what my mother has taught me, and I'm passing that to my daughter also.
Excellent. Intergenerational role modeling. Wonderful. A quick one, Naj?
Oh, wow. Working from home works, but we need to think more about benefits and amenities for women.
Yeah, I would just say, for researchers in the room, if you are interested in working with Upwork, it's so helpful for us to know, we're not doing long-term studies following different field groups on our own. We need researchers to help us do that work. So please reach out. There's a welcome.
I actually took my sentence, actually. It's like, so Pragya, why don't you go? She lives in Amsterdam, so give us the Dutch perspective on all of this, maybe.
The Dutch perspective is, there's the entire gig work dilemma is happening as we speak. There's a lot of European regulation that's following one after the other. It's going to kill the business models. And so I do think that we need to educate ourselves about the benefits, the flexibility, autonomy, especially for a very, very quick data point here. Across our food delivery businesses, everything from, as I said, Swiggy in India, Delivery Hero, and DoorDash. I was chatting with Elizabeth, who leads policy at DoorDash here. And I said, how many women do you have? Anticipating it's in single digits, the percentage. 60% of Dashers are women. Because you can deliver a burrito with a child strapped in the back, but there are not many other jobs that you can do. So there's a lot to be said for gig work and the opportunity for women out there. I think we can close on that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so Sohini. Thank you so much for calling us. And we want to more and more interact on this topic because it's really, really very important.
Thank you.
Today I'll be talking about research that we've done in Indonesia and India on two platforms. And we're talking about women's and men's experience within a country, and we'll also be making cross-country comparisons. So a little bit about the organization that I work for. We're called ID Insight. We're a global research policy organizations that help evidence makers to use, policymakers to use evidence in their decision making. This particular grant is supported by the Gates Foundation and consists of two components. The first component is descriptive. We just want to understand who are the digital workers. The second component is about generating causal analysis to understand what are the welfare implications of being able to participate in digital work, and also are there any add-ons. So we're currently, we just concluded descriptive studies and moving on to ideas on the causal studies. Okay, so motivation for this study. Well, there's been a rise in digital labor platforms across the globe, and it has potential to provide income opportunities, especially for women, because they're looking for flexibility, as we've heard over and over again. Several studies have documented experiences of gig workers in developing countries and middle-income countries as well, but the evidence on women is missing, especially in the male-dominated sectors. So some of these studies have small sample size or qualitative or don't have representation of the population to kind of say what are the patterns generally. So in this study, we partnered with two firms, one in India and one in Indonesia, and both are in digital gig driving. So you see an example of a woman on a motorbike, and she, in this case, is delivering something to the passenger. All of them are two-wheeler drivers. We worked with the platform to obtain the population records of all the drivers at the time of the sample taking, and we reached a random sample over the phone, obtaining about 400 women a sample in India and about 800 women in Indonesia. One thing to say is the representation of women in these platforms is very small. In India, less than 1% of all drivers are women. In Indonesia, it's a little bit more, but still tiny, tiny. If you look at the same statistics in developed countries such as the United States, there's a little bit more of distribution of women and men working for these platforms. And that has to do with cultural norms, also digital access, and access to vehicles as well. First we want to look at the description of the population, and first we see a striking difference between India and Indonesia about how gig workers engage. And more people are engaging full-time in Indonesia than in India. So in India, it is more of a part-time gig. There's also no difference in how women and men work in Indonesia and there are in India. And more women in India are engaging part-time. In Indonesia, they have a choice of what sort of service to deliver, and many of them opt out of passenger driving. This is A, due to discrimination, because sometimes riders cancel orders if they find out that their driver is a woman, and B, explicit harassment because they're driving a motorcycle and there's a man behind who keeps moving forward. We also see demographic differences across between men and women that are holding up. We see that in both countries, women are a little bit older than men. And in India, that's actually in line with general labor participation rates of women, and they tend to enter the just general participation in the labor force market after having children. We see that in India, they are indeed more likely to be married and more likely to be children. In Indonesia, the story is kind of the opposite. We see that women are less likely to be married and also less likely to have children than men. So there's some, cultural and different types of population are attracted to these platforms, which are quite the same in different countries. So that's important to keep in mind when we're talking about global gig work, is that context really matters. Student population is also quite prevalent in India and not at all in Indonesia. Women in Indonesia are also a little bit higher educated than men, which is potentially suggesting that there are just limited opportunities for women to work after obtaining education. Most people are coming from full-time jobs. So there's a whole narrative. We think that this is going to draw in informal workers. And yes, to some extent it does, but many people are still coming from formal employment, which potentially means that they're either looking for flexibility, or maybe these jobs are better in one way or the other, or there are no formal jobs available in the economy and they're here. More women compared to men in both countries are reporting that their current income is higher than their previous earnings. Earnings. So we differentiate between gross and net earnings because there are quite significant expenses associated with driving, such as fuel, loans, and anything else that has to do with operating a vehicle. There is a gender pay gap in gross earnings per hour. And we don't think it's explicit discrimination by the platform, though we don't have the data to say this, but it is in line with what was found in the United States. And the story is that women can't work on profitable hours because profitable hours are either at night or during the time when they want to be at home with their children and husbands. We see that net earnings per hour the difference is higher in Indonesia. And I've run out of time, but I do want to say that overall we're finding that working conditions are a little bit more favorable to women in India than there are in Indonesia. There are many explanations that are potentially behind this, partially because in India these are delivery jobs and not passenger driving jobs. But partially it's because Indian jobs do pay a little bit more than the Indonesian jobs. So I'm happy to talk about research a little bit more if anybody would like to. Thank you.